you've seen the programme, and I just very much look forward to having the opportunity to share with you some information and understand some of the activities that are going on here and in the context of the transatlantic trade objectives. You're probably aware of that. And that's really why we're here, is to look at how science contributes to the objectives set out in the European Union and the US government's objectives in establishing a free trade zone. So without further ado, I'll speak to you more in detail after a number of introductions. But first, I'd like to welcome virtually the MEP who launched this process in the European Parliament in March of this year, a compatriot, Mr. Sean Kelly, MEP. He sits on the Science Committee in the European Parliament, and he also sits on the delegation, the Committee for Transatlantic Relations, the so-called Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue, who get together about every quarter and sit down and work through legislation which pertains to both blocs. And obviously that gains added significance within the context of the TTIP, as it's referred to, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. So I will now launch Sean and come back to you when he's finished.
Hello and welcome to the New York meeting of the Transatlantic Science Forum. My name is Sean Kelly. I'm a member of the European Parliament for Ireland South. I sit on the influential Industry, Research and Energy Committee of the Parliament. This committee is responsible for the European Union's multi-billion euro research budget. In March of last year, I hosted the largest ever science meeting in the European Parliament. The EU Science and Global Collaboration Conference brought together scientists, ministers, entrepreneurs and officials from across the globe. Notable attendees included Buzz Aldrin, Mae Jemison and Irish Prime Minister Enda Kenny. This global conference has had a number of concrete outcomes. The Transatlantic Science Forum is one such outcome, and I am glad to co-chair it. Convening the Transatlantic Science Forum is also timely in light of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership negotiations, which have recently begun. Enhanced cooperation in the field of science could be one of the positive outcomes of a successful TTIP, and I view the Transatlantic Science Forum as an opportunity to provide expert input to the process. The TSF also dovetails nicely with my position on the Transatlantic Legislators Dialogue, the body comprising congressmen and members of the European Parliament, which discusses the key transatlantic policy issues. It is impossible to promote transatlantic trade without recognising the key role of science and innovation in addressing global challenges. We must focus on setting mutually acceptable standards to broaden and deepen the transatlantic market. Key examples include in the areas of health and ICT, and I hope that today's meeting in New York will further explore transatlantic collaboration within these themes and will make recommendations for research and innovation in the TTIP. There will be additional TSF meetings in the coming months in Washington, D.C., Sacramento, London, Dublin and Brussels, and I hope to meet you there. My best wishes for a successful meeting and my regards to my friends in the NYPD who gave me this badge free of charge when they came to Dublin a few months ago. Thank you very much. Go to
Sean Kelly has a number of claims to fame, but he's the former president of the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association, which gives him a particular profile in Ireland and indeed in the United States. I'd like now to welcome Carlton Van from the Mayor's Office of International Relations. Carlton.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers of today's Transatlantic Science Forum for the opportunity to speak to you. It's appropriate that New York is one of the host cities in the United States for this forum because science and technology play an increasingly important role in New York City's economy. Today's program will focus on the economics of urban data and the Applied Sciences NYC initiative. But I'd like to take a moment to speak more generally about science and technology-related industries in New York City and the importance of international trade and investment to New York. According to a recent analysis, there are over 260,000 workers in New York City in the tech/information sector, and they contribute roughly $30 billion annually to the city's economy. The Partnership for New York City reports that tech is one of the highest growing industries in the city, and over the past decade has grown at an average rate of about 5.3%, and there's considerable room for further growth. To support the development of the digital economy, the city has announced a number of programs and initiatives to encourage entrepreneurship and innovation, including a network of business incubators for young, innovative companies. After the first city-supported incubator was opened by NYU on Varick Street in Manhattan, many private sector companies have opened their own facilities, providing more space for entrepreneurs in New York. Several foreign governments with trade and investment offices here in the city have taken advantage of this infrastructure to develop programs to link tech companies in their home countries with the New York tech scene. One of the city's most visible initiatives is the We Are Made in New York website at wearemadeinny.com that brings together in one location all the resources and services provided by the City of New York to help tech businesses grow here. I encourage you to take a look at the website to learn about the more than 1,000 digital and tech companies that call New York home. The city has also used competitions, prizes, and pilot programs to highlight the tech industry and to develop markets for innovative technologies. Most of these programs are run through the city's Economic Development Corporation, or EDC. For example, EDC organizes the annual NYC Big Apps competition. In 2011, the city passed Local Law 11, which allowed the release of thousands of public data sets. You can see the data sets for yourself online at nyc.gov/data. The Big Apps competition encourages developers to use these data sets to create smartphone apps that will improve the lives of New Yorkers. Last year's winners include an app that helps office workers locate childcare facilities near their place of employment, and also an app that helps New Yorkers find local restaurants with healthful food options. Other EDC initiatives include NYC Next Idea, a competition for business school students who want to start a business in New York. By the way, last year's winners came from Munich, Germany. NYC Venture Fellows, a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, including overseas entrepreneurs that are starting a business here in New York. And the World to NYC program, which brings delegations of digital companies to New York City. The city also initiated New York's Next Top Makers competition to promote 3D printing. This competition encourages local entrepreneurs, designers, and inventors to submit ideas for this new technology that will revolutionize the way that objects are manufactured. The 3D printing company that sponsors this competition was originally started in the Netherlands, but later moved its headquarters here to New York. The second panel discussion today will feature the universities in the Applied Sciences NYC initiative and their role in making New York a global hub of scientific research and innovation. These universities are vital to the evolution of our economy. But as a city administration, we have an obligation to ensure that the students in our public schools also have the science and technology skills needed for the jobs of the future. The New York City Department of Education manages one of the most international populations on Earth. The city educates over 1 million pre-kindergarten to grade 12 students in over 1,700 schools. Students and their parents communicate in over 180 different languages. This great diversity is part of the city's strength, but we must ensure that all students have access to an education for the 21st century. In September of last year, the city launched Digital Ready, a program that uses new media tools in the classroom and introduces students to careers in technology through mentorship with local entrepreneurs. The city has also created 2 new high schools focused on computer science. In October of last year, President Obama visited the Pathways in Technology Early College High School, or PTech, here in Brooklyn, and praised its innovative curriculum. This school was opened in partnership with IBM and CUNY and provides 4 years of high school as well as 2 additional years of college education. In addition to the programs for public school students, the city has announced a number of initiatives to increase the number of New York City residents with access to high-speed internet. For example, free Wi-Fi is now available in over 50 city parks. This infrastructure has been made possible by a number of public-private partnerships with companies such as AT&T and Google. In December, the city announced the largest continuous free outdoor Wi-Fi network in the nation. The Harlem Wi-Fi network will extend 95 city blocks from 110th Street to 138th Street, from Madison Avenue to 8th Avenue. The initiative, which is funded by a generous grant from the Furman Family Foundation, will be implemented in three phases over the next few months, and it will increase access for approximately 80,000 Harlem residents, as well as businesses and visitors in the area. In addition to promoting the digital economy, the city has been working over the past several years to support the development of a thriving biotechnology industry. The reasons to locate a biotech company here are obvious. New York is ranked number 2 in the National Institute of Health Awards. There are over 9 major academic medical centers in the city. There are currently over 120 biotech companies located here, and there are over 100 VC firms in New York investing in life science companies. In September of last year, the New York Genome Center, a nonprofit organization that brings together New York's leading medical and academic institutions, opened its doors in Lower Manhattan. The goal of the center is to accelerate the development of new diagnostics and treatments, and to provide an engine for life science commercialization. To encourage entrepreneurship in bioscience, the city and its EDC have introduced a number of programs, including an application assistance program for ventures that are applying for small business innovation research and small business technology transfer grants, a 6-month training program for entrepreneurs in the life sciences community, and a program which provides funding for up to 10 innovative pilot projects in healthcare technology. In early December, the city also announced the New York Early Stage Life Science Funding Initiative, a public-private venture fund that will be seeded by $10 million from the city's Economic Development Corporation and an additional $40 million from corporate sponsors GE Ventures, Celgene, and Eli Lilly and Company. Recently, the city welcomed its newest biotech incubator space, the Harlem Biospace on West 127th Street, which provides office and wet lab space for up to 24 companies. The facility joins already established facilities, the Alexandria Center for Life Sciences on the East River, the SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn, Biobat at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and the Audubon Biomedical and Technology Center at Columbia University. We expect these initiatives to attract investment in biosciences from domestic as well as international sources. It's important to remember that New York has always been an open economy and has prospered by accepting people and ideas from around the world. Throughout its history, New York has attracted millions of immigrants, and people continue to come here in search of opportunity. With a current population of almost 8.5 million, the city is home to 3 million immigrants. Citywide, the largest numbers come from the Dominican Republic, China, Mexico, and Jamaica. These immigrants, as well as domestic migrants from other parts of the United States, have helped the city maintain its current record population numbers. For the first time in more than 60 years, more people are moving into New York than are moving out. And immigrants are an important part of our economy. They comprise 47% of all employed residents across all major industries, with a high concentration in areas such as services and construction. As the city stays economically strong, it will continue to attract immigrants who will in turn support the local economy, a virtuous cycle. But not all foreign visitors to New York choose to immigrate here. Many are here temporarily on business or as tourists, and we welcome them all. Our office maintains an international business directory of foreign companies with a presence here in New York. According to the directory, there are over 1,800 foreign companies with a presence here in New York City. The majority of them employ 50 or fewer employees, but over 30 of them have 1,000 employees each, making them major contributors to the local economy. The countries with the largest number of companies here are Japan, France, the UK, and Italy. More foreign companies have offices in New York City than any other city in the United States because New York has everything needed to succeed in the global economy: advanced infrastructure, access to expansive markets, a diverse and talented workforce, business partners, support services, and professional associations. And tourists as well are important to our economy. Last year, 54 million tourists came to New York, more than 11 million of them from international locations. The countries most represented were Canada, the UK, Brazil, France, Germany, and Australia. The number of international visitors has more than doubled since 2002, and they contributed $58 billion to our economy last year and over $39 billion in direct spending. And let's not forget the international diplomatic community here. New York is host to the UN headquarters, 193 permanent missions to the UN, and 114 foreign consulates, making New York home to the largest diplomatic community in the world. In international rankings, New York City often comes out on top. Last year, the Economist Intelligence Unit ranked New York the most competitive city today, and FDI magazine ranked New York first in its American Cities of the Future survey. According to the report, New York attracted over 1% of total global FDI in 2012, and the total number of FDI projects increased by over 10% from the previous year. Although the city is justly proud of the accolades, the world is rapidly changing, and we cannot take anything for granted. We must continue to innovate and to grow. I work in the Mayor's Office for International Affairs, which serves as the city's primary liaison between the city government and the diplomatic and consular communities here. As director in the Division for International Business, I work with foreign government representatives, bilateral chambers of commerce, and other investment professionals to assist foreign companies interested in opening an office in New York. So if any of you know of a company that's interested in coming here, please feel free to contact me. New York is a city of reinvention. We were once a city of industry, but as the world economy changed, the city transformed itself into a center for finance, media, business services, and creative industries. The city continues to adapt with its current focus on science and technology industries such as bioscience, information technology, and green technology. A great example of this spirit of reinvention is the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a facility that once built warships is now home to a rapidly growing cluster of green manufacturers and is the future home of Carnegie Mellon's integrative media program at Steiner Studios. This program, along with the initiatives of NYU, Cornell Technion, and Columbia, will play a vital role in the continuing transformation of the city's economy. New York is also a magnet for talent and has welcomed people from around the globe since it was first founded by the Dutch in the 17th century. These two characteristics, a penchant for reinvention and an openness to people and ideas, explain why we encourage the development of more trade and investment between the US and Europe, and we welcome today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlton, for that most impressive information on this magnificent city. And I think it provides very, very, very good context for our discussions today. So I will now introduce some of the topics and give you some of the background on why we're here. And I suppose the outcomes of today, well, for me, there are two. One is to provide evidence and input into this TTIP process. So we will have a meeting, I've referred to them already, with the members of the European Parliament and members of Congress and other bodies. So what we want to do is create a chapter for science and innovation within the TTIP. And for that we need evidence, and for that we need to be very, very specific and particular. And to do that, we will look at the policy objectives, and my intention is, with reference to those various policy intentions and objectives, to provide evidence. I work with policymakers a lot. I highlight policy objectives to them, but they say, what does it look like when we implement it? So that's the case we want to make here, and I'm very happy that these two panels we look at today, in my view, will do that. Second objective is by way of context. As you know, research needs funding, and one context, not the only one, I would stress not the only one, but the European Union has launched its framework program for research and collaboration called Horizon 2020. It's the 8th iteration of this program. They changed the name for reasons unknown to me from Framework 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 to Horizon 2020. But broadly, Horizon 2020 does exactly what the previous ones did, with a slightly different emphasis. In that, there are much opportunity for research collaboration, and I suppose my take on research is that it's increasingly global, addresses challenges from a global perspective, and I think while that presents indeed challenges, I think it's a hugely important perspective on how research can take place. Specifically with regard to the United States, the European Union has an S&T cooperation agreement, which you may or may not be familiar with, but that sets out common priorities, and I use the word common priorities there because what it does not do, it actually doesn't do a lot of things. It's not a policy level dialogue. So it's not a transatlantic science policy level dialogue. It is a process which identifies program level activities, which is very meritorious, and I support that. However, there's plenty of scope for policy level dialogue and discussion. Again, there are certain impediments which I just like to, or barriers, which I just like to refer to, but then ignore because I think the opportunities are enormous. They deal with broadly, it's impossible for there to be joint EU-US funding. There can be separate funding for common activities, but there's not joint. And I would like to foresee a situation where there's joint funding. I think that would provide much more integration in terms of the research. Then there's intellectual property, enough said. There's ITAR, enough said. And but with recognizing those as very much factors influencing the conduct of collaborative research and development, and they do present challenges. However, I do see that the opportunities in addressing common global challenges present ways indeed to surmount these obstacles. And what do we look at today is how specific projects could be launched. So this Transatlantic Science Forum, as Sean Kelly referred to, came out of the European Science Global Challenges process and more or less doing what it says in the can, bringing people together to address those. Specifically, we had a meeting with CEO leaders from the pharma sector, and they sat around a table and they talked about the trade barriers in their industry. And I made the point, well, certainly those trade barriers aren't going to dissolve today or tomorrow. But I think what you have to do is recognise the scope for scientific collaboration and address that as a key priority for the pharmaceutical sector. And Sean Kelly then, as a result of that thought process, came up with the Transatlantic Science Forum, looking at how TTIP can recognise the challenges unique to science and the opportunities that science presents with recognition to TTIP. Science is only mentioned once in the draft reference for TTIP. Our objective then is to have a new chapter. These are some of the organisations that we've already consulted with on this process, and it's ongoing. We've had various town hall level meetings, larger scale meetings in the European Parliament, consultation meetings with the US Congress, and we will have further meetings as Sean Kelly referred to. But I think that you can see from this slide and other information on our part, the range of people who are engaged in this, from everyone from ONR Global to the Innovative Medicines Institute and various law firms, the Virtual Liver, the Virtual Patient, Maastricht University, and others. I think that points to the breadth of scope here in identifying opportunities that can foster cooperation. Objectives: promoting debate and discussion, looking at the relationship broadly from the point of view of science, addressing the need for integrated regulation. I choose those words carefully. I mean, obviously there are challenges there. There's no better or worse here. There's just different. However, by sensitizing the policy making and decision making community to the context there, I think that the scientific community can advance cooperation to a greater extent than is currently the case transatlantically. I've highlighted science capacity and research infrastructures. In the European Union, you may be aware of the ESFRI, the European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructures, which broadly is Europe's quest to build capacity. It kind of looked across the ocean about a decade ago and said, those Americans, they've got a lot of capacity, we don't have capacity. I'm sure somebody can correct me, but I gather that the US has something in the region of 180 or so large-scale scientific facilities, and arguably Europe, per se, doesn't. Obviously, there's lots of national capacity, so how do you aggregate that? How do you knit that together? And the response to that was this ESFRI process, of which Europe has 50 priority projects. One or two examples are the biobanking infrastructure, the BBMRI, the biobanking and biomolecular resources research infrastructure, and that now has without going into all aspects of it, it is now permanently established. It was launched at the Medical University of Graz after 5 years of development, and the European Union approach to capacity is to go through a design phase, a construction phase, and an operation phase. And many of these research infrastructures covering, I mentioned BBMRI, then you've got the clinical trials research infrastructure, you have high security laboratories, and a range of others dealing with translational medicine. These would be under the category of BMS, biological and medical sciences. At the other end of the spectrum, you have not funnily enough, but you have one dealing with radio astronomy called the SKA, which is the European Union Priority Research Infrastructure project, which you will probably know is now going to be constructed in Africa and part of Australia. And again, an example of the globalization of these infrastructures. So the capacity bit is hugely important, and specifically, just according to my evidence, when we have meetings on these BBMRIs and the ECRINs in Brussels, over the last couple of years, a lot of US participation in those, a lot of US institutional involvement, cooperation, looking for how cooperation can take place. And there was a meeting organised by the International Medical Informatics Association in Brussels last year, and about 80% of the participants at that meeting were from the United States, and I asked them, why is that? And they said, well, if we don't get the medical informatics thing right together, then we are going to jeopardise the potential for European global markets in these areas. And again, a specific example of the potential for cooperation and what that cooperation can deliver in terms of market development. The TTIP itself, to create a free trade area between the EU and US, two largest trading blocs in the world. Nothing new in that, but I think what is new now is the political imperative to try and come up with a formula and a formulation of how that could work. Again, recognising the differences and the individuality of both blocs, but the potential for market growth there is quite clear. That's some of the figures. The three pillars of TTIP deal with market access, regulation, rules, and standards. And my own view is that actually science collaboration is actually a very formidable market access tool, because by doing collaborative science, you're in at the ground level, you're in the pre-competitive level, you are fostering and enable cooperation, collaborations, which then, through innovation, evolve market access. Looking at the health sciences area, just one example, standards will be hugely important there, and there's a recognition that EU-US bilateral trade and investment, TTIP, will influence global health and standards, more or less what I just said a couple of minutes ago, but again, worth stressing that. And certainly countries like Ireland, who pride themselves in their ability to attract foreign direct investment in these areas, that matters a lot. And all of this, and listen to Carton earlier on, Americans can teach us a lot, I'd say, as a European, because remember, Mr. Ford's descendants were building motor cars in County Cork in Ireland long before the Europeans ever thought of a single market, you know, and the Americans were able to figure out how to work those different plug systems again long before the Cecchini report on the cost of a non-Europe. So I think the American approach here is something which, you know, I personally would admire, but I feel can indeed bring a lot of, I suppose, what's, you know, popularly characterised as the can-do thing, but I would more accurately call it a process, methodology to collaborative science and technology, and all that means in terms of market evolution. So a lot. So this is not new, is what I'm saying. This is progressive. I think what's new is the desire at a high political level to make this a reality. And while that process is in train, my mantra is that the scientists and the people who do research from a collaborative standpoint need to get behind that process and feed into it, and that's precisely what we are doing here. I've mentioned research infrastructure there, again, some of the examples, but I think that capacity science, we've heard about big data, and again, have an interesting brief discussion beforehand, but I suppose data pertains to all of these. People will say that the biobanking infrastructure, you know, it does what it does with molecular science, and the SKA does with what it'll do with astronomy. But broadly, these are ICT enabled. You know, how you collect this data, how you store this data, how you process this data is that's the challenge there. And if you ask the guys at IBM where they're doing the most advanced computational science project at the moment, they'll tell you it's the DOME project on the back of the SKA. And then there's the recent science paper which talked about dealt with the using astronomy algorithms in brain scans. So point there is, you know, you're looking at the enabling capacity necessary for doing the science. You're looking at the globalization of that, but then the imperative is, well, how do you make that operational from a standard standpoint, from enabling this data? One of the guys at ONR before coming here told me, well, actually float the idea of you talk about a trade-free zone, and again, I'm not, as I call it, a tradeist, but how about a data-free zone? How would that work? And I think trade has very often been defined in terms of tires and bananas and coffee, but how is it defined in terms of data? I think that's probably a blank sheet of paper right now, and I think it's something which I would love policymakers to visit more, and we'll be promoting that idea. But I think if we look at big data in its various manifestations and what that potentially means to society, indeed urban society and society in a wider context, and how that contributes to the evolution of those innovations and technologies which will allow society to evolve, I think the data challenge is probably preeminent. And I say that, of course, with very sensitive and to the recent history of the NSA discussions and everything that's happened about that. But my perspective on that is it's been wonderful, really, because it's actually sensitized and educated, indeed, many policymakers do that, and certainly walking the corridors of Brussels in the last couple of months, there's no sentiment at all that those horrible Americans, spying on our Merkel. No, I think that, there's a genuine imperative there to see, well, how could this, what does this mean in terms of course, regulation. And of course, I'm talking now. I mean, I'm very conscious of the fact that the European Parliament is working through its regulation on data protection, on medical devices, on clinical trials, and of course, these will have very direct impact on how industry performs in the European Union, and that pertains, for example, to the medical devices guys, in sunny County Galway and Sligo in Ireland. So. The regulation doesn't happen in isolation, so I think the science has to increasingly recognise that. So I think that enabling regulatory environment is something that I would highlight as important within the context of the dialogue and discussion on transatlantic science with reference to the free trade objectives. I think I've mentioned in the interest of time, I'll just pass through this. I mean, data protection, all these things are live discussion in the European Union is my point here, and they will impact how innovation happens. And this is not specifically with reference to the transatlantic process. This is reference to Europe full stop. And what is very necessary there is that there's a more sophisticated discussion on the implications of data regulation on the conduct of collaborative research, and specifically on the use of medical data. The transatlantic, the TTIP process, it more or less has that time frame. The imperative behind this is really to sort of get something done before the European Parliament dissembles. There's European Parliament elections in late May of this year, and there'll be a new Parliament in place with its committees probably in July. The European Commission finishes its term. There'll be a President of the Commission appointed in the European Parliament's Strasbourg Assembly in July of this year, and probably new commissioners in office by September or October of this year. So again, objective, get this done, or at least get this sketched out in a form that can be adopted by the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. And that's some of the information. I won't go through it here, but these goes through various rounds and various iterations. But I think the view at the moment is it continues to be constructive. It continues to be positive. There continues to be agreement that there is a need and there is an opportunity to make this happen. And what we're doing now, as the rounds become a bit more sophisticated, is looking to feed in a science chapter by about early March in draft form this year. Look at, there are, of course, some sticking points. I'm just putting it up there on food standards, audiovisual sector. And, of course, the French will always go with that. Public procurement, we had Bart Gordon, the former chair of the House Science Committee in the European Parliament, and he was talking a lot about that. And, that's probably something to put front and centre in terms of how a transatlantic marketplace in science could work. But needs, obviously, a lot more visiting before there is a single market and procurement with reference to science. Maritime transport market is another issue. On the forum timeline, basically, with the TSF, we're just mirroring what is happening at TTIP level, range of meetings, series of consultations and input. This is some snaps from the meeting that Sean Kelly referred to earlier on, where we originated from. And as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about a policy process here, but again, how do we make that tangible to policymakers? So we will be coming up with a couple of project ideas covering ICT, health, big data, where they are different, food and agriculture, and research infrastructures. And partly that's driven by a number of the sponsors of this process and organisations. The Intels and the Microsofts are very keen to advance collaborative research. And what does that look like on a Monday morning? What are we going to do? And it's something that I'm very, very happy to encourage. And I say that with reference to the fact that, talk about a transatlantic science marketplace. Well, the guys at Intel in Leixlip in County Dublin tell me they're involved in 127 collaborative research projects funded by the European Union today. And so, it is very active. So I think what we're looking at is how does that translate into a wider landscape, and how can policymakers and regulators further enable that, because they're taking these from a bottom-up standpoint. They're competing for projects under specific headings. What they would like to see is how does, there's a lot of synergies between the 127 projects they're involved in, and how do they knit together under an overarching framework. And that's where the big data stuff comes in, and that's where the research infrastructure comes in. I will just look at some of the points coming from the meeting. We had a high-level meeting in the European Parliament. That's the one that Bart Gordon was at, and some of the outcomes were from that were agreement that there should be a separate chapter, looking at the strengthened role for scientific bodies, an early warning system on both sides of the pond in terms of regulation and the impact of regulation. I think that's something that Bart Gordon was championing. I believe that. And that relies on I suppose a more cultural connection and a more connectivity between the bodies that make those decisions in the European Parliament and in the European Commission and the Council. And I'm always reminded of the whole Kissinger thing, sort of who do you call? And I think that was very apt then. It's probably, I can appreciate it. It's probably still apt, and that's I think there's lots of the proclivities of the way the European Union institutions have been set up and operate. However, I think once you scratch beneath the surface, you actually can realise that people are trying to do sort of very similar things. Mutual recognition and transparency mechanisms. So they're really what we're underlining in terms of a feed-in. In addition to supporting the creation of strengthening of transatlantic infrastructures, incentives for investments, provisions that protect innovation, and again, touching on to intellectual property there. But that's very much central to the TTIP process. But that, I suppose, with respect to collaborative science and technology, is probably gains added importance.